Hello, and welcome back to the Rails Quest channel. Have you ever wanted to mount a rack application to your Rails application? If you know what I'm talking about, this is a really neat feature of Rails. There's this protocol, there's this way of implementing web applications with Ruby, and it's called rack. And Rails supports mounting rack applications to your Rails application. They're very simple. They're basically just a nested call to a single method that passes in the environment and builds up the response and sends it back to the browser. It's a very, very simple concept. It's not something you'd want to write a whole lot of code in, but one benefit to it, if you're trying to distribute a little bit of web behavior to people through maybe as a gem or some other library, it's a very easy way to bundle up a little bit of logic that works in a web context. So rack application. I was playing with this recently because I wanted to experiment with hosting my own gem server, and I wanted to take it a step further. There's a gem called Gem in a Box, and you can deploy this gem standalone as its own gem server. You use rack and you stand up a server that runs the Gem in a Box rack application, and suddenly you have a gem, like a gem service, sort of like Ruby gems, that is your own, and you can install gems from there. Well, one of the limitations with that setup is the only way to authenticate it is to set an environment variable or set a variable that is just one credential for the whole server. So I thought it would be a fun exercise to try out the new pattern of authenticating a Rails 8 app and use Rails 8 generated user to authenticate access to my gem server. And in order to do that, I need to mount the gem server as a rack application into my Rails app. Now, let me rewind the clock just a little bit. Before Rails 8, you had to install gems to manage your users. For a while now, I've been recommending Authentication 0. It's a great gem. It does the same thing that the Rails 8 authentication does, but it's been around longer, and it has more features. So here's how you would do this though with another popular gem called Devise. I'm sure if you've been around the Rails world, you've used this before. It's pretty simple, and this is a neat feature of Devise, I'm not gonna lie. Devise for users, authenticate user do, mount your rack app at rack app. What this is going to do is it's going to authenticate this rack application using the same method that you use to authenticate your users. So drawing inspiration from the simplicity of this, I've got a little rack application that can wrap any rack application and provide a layer of your own security in front of it. So let's take a quick look at that. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of how this is implemented, but I'm just going to kind of show you around so that hopefully you can roll your own if you're interested in doing so. And feel free to ask any questions that you might have if I leave something out that you really think is a missing piece here. So here's the whole rack application, 74 lines. The meat and potatoes of any rack application is the call method. This is what rack is going to call and pass in that env. And we use Rails action dispatch here to get a nice API into that environment. And you can see we've got various ways of authenticating. You can authenticate in the browser with a session. You can authenticate using basic auth or a bearer token. And if any of the authenticators return a result, then we go ahead to the rack application that we're wrapping. If not, then we redirect to sign in if we're in the browser, or we give a 401 if we're not in the browser context. So let's go back here. What this looks like is this is my rack application wrapper with authentication, and we use a rack builder to build a little rack application and mount it at gems. So more work than this, but it's really not too bad, and that could easily be packaged up as a gem. Maybe that's something that I'll do here in the future, especially if I see a little bit of demand for that here in the channel. So no demo would be complete just looking at the code. Let's look at how this would work in reality. So here's my scaffolded, totally unstyled Rails application. I'm already signed in, so I have access to this Gem in a Box server. Here's what it would look like if I didn't have access. Remember the redirect? That's what we're doing here. We're redirecting back to the sign in. And another little key feature is tokens. So I rolled a quick token model, and you can get a server token and copy it, and you can copy the URL to the gem server with authentication built in with HTTP basic authentication here. So what does that look like when we're developing a gem? Well, I have here an example gem. Let's build it. All right, so this is what happens if you want to push a gem to your custom gem server. We're going to need the token, and then we're going to want to know that it actually uploaded correctly. So now we do gem in a box. You can see the instructions here. Install gem in a box. It gives you a nice little summary of what you're supposed to do, and it even tells you how to authenticate. So gem in a box, example gem, this is going to push that gem to that server. Enter the host. We want to enter the host with the authenticated URL. And it's as simple as that. If I tried to push without the authentication, it would reject it. Let's see what that looks like. We can delete the host out of there. This time, let's copy the unauthenticated. Error 401 received. So we know our authentication is working. Okay, let's grab that authenticated URL again, because I want to show you the entire round trip here. This is how you would actually use this in a Rails app. So look at our gem in a box. You can gem install it if you had your sources set up the way that they recommend here. But most of the time we're probably using a gem file. So this is what I'm going to do right now. So we run bundle, and it installs the gem. Once again, if I take away the credentials, we get an error that we need to authenticate. And that's the basics right there. You could use something like Kamal to deploy this, and you would have tokens that you could hand out to access your gem server. And you could easily delete those tokens and manage access to it without having to reboot your server or change credentials everywhere just because one set was compromised or you wanted to rotate your credentials. So that is how you mount a rack application in your Rails app. And as a bonus, that is how you can host gem in a box within your Rails application and get all the authentication goodies without the bloat of installing Devise. And with that, please like and subscribe. Follow me wherever I am. I'm on X, I'm on YouTube, I'm all over the place. So find me there, follow along so you can keep getting videos like this. Give me feedback, let me know what you'd like to know about, and have a blessed week.